ancient curse buried for decades resurfaces and destroys anyone who comes into contact with it. The story opens in 1910 on the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, deep within a vast and desolate desert. There, a man named Jafar wanders in despair after suffering a tragic loss that claimed the lives of his entire family. Exhausted from his journey across the desert, and with barely any strength left, he ultimately decides to bury an ancient artifact, a mystical statue shaped like a chicken, which he believes is responsible for the catastrophe that took his loved ones. He had previously attempted to destroy it, but every effort failed, as though the object were indestructible. With no other option, he buries it far away from civilization, hoping it will never be discovered again. Soon after hiding the artifact, Jafar begins to feel its sinister influence creeping into his mind. Consumed by fear and unable to resist its power, he ultimately takes his own life by stabbing himself, dying alone in the desert after doing everything he could to keep the artifact hidden from the world. As time passes, 93 years later in 2003, the narrative shifts to Pasadena, a suburban area in California. Inside a dilapidated and poorly maintained house, a young boy named Mikey is seen shaking in fear while attempting to call 911. His voice trembling, he pleads for help after being kidnapped by a strange and terrifying woman. The tension escalates as Mikey hears slow, approaching footsteps, sending him into a panic. Desperate to avoid being discovered, he hides as best as he can. Amid his overwhelming fear, Mikey seizes a chance to escape, moving cautiously and silently in search of a way out. However, his attempt fails when he cannot find an exit and ends up trapped once again, cornered with no way to flee. After being recaptured, he is forced to sit with the woman and watch television. On the screen, a news report reveals details about his own kidnapping, which has now lasted over 9 months, along with information about 4 similar cases involving young boys within the past year. The report also mentions that Mikey's mother, Naomi, still holds on to hope that her son will be found, despite his long disappearance. Not long after, a police officer named Sheriff Miller arrives at the house after receiving the emergency call. What makes the situation even more intense is that he comes alone. Noticing the woman's suspicious behavior, he asks for permission to search the house. Realizing he is by himself, the woman calmly allows him inside. As Miller steps in, he immediately senses something is wrong and uses his radio to request backup. Despite this, his curiosity drives him to continue investigating the house. Even as he is surrounded by darkness and a disturbing smell, the tension peaks when Miller discovers a bathtub filled with a red liquid, prompting him to urgently call for his colleagues to arrive as quickly as possible. However, before any help can reach him, his attention is drawn to a noise coming from the basement. Carefully investigating, he is horrified to find 3 lifeless bodies of kidnapping victims lying there. Still in shock, he is suddenly attacked from behind by the woman, who kills him instantly. This horrifying event raises a major question about the true identity of the mysterious woman. To uncover the truth, the story then shifts back to 1 year earlier, when the artifact that had once been buried somehow resurfaces and eventually ends up in the possession of a man named John, delivered to him as a mysterious package. Not long afterward, John receives a call from his friend Steve, who confesses that he was the one who sent the object. Steve asks John to hold on to the artifact for a while, explaining that its value will likely rise so they can eventually sell it on the black market, implying that the object is extremely valuable. At the same time, however, Steve issues a serious warning, telling John not to open or interfere with it under any circumstances. According to what he has learned, the artifact is believed to be a vessel for a dangerous, child-devouring demon known as Vulpazu. Although it sounds absurd, almost like a fabricated story, John dismisses the warning and instead focuses on the potential profit, even negotiating for a 50% share of the future sale. After the call ends, something unusual begins to occur. John suddenly appears to fall under the artifact's influence, as if an unseen force is gradually taking control of him. The situation worsens when he accidentally inhales a strange smoke emerging from the object, which causes his behavior to become increasingly erratic and unnatural. Meanwhile, inside the same house, it is revealed that the terrifying woman who will later abduct Mikey is actually Abigail, John's daughter. That night, while intoxicated, John tells his youngest child, Alice, to go to bed. However, the atmosphere turns unsettling when Abigail becomes visibly frightened as her father approaches, as though she senses something is deeply wrong with him. As the night deepens, Abigail begins to feel a strange energy radiating from the cursed artifact. Not long afterward, a figure resembling John, but clearly possessed, follows her into her room. While Abigail sleeps, the entity within John appears ready to act, until it is ultimately revealed that the demon chooses to transfer itself into Abigail instead, making her its new host. From that moment forward, Abigail's life changes completely. Overwhelmed by fear and confusion, she decides to run away from home early the next morning. As time goes on, a series of disturbing events continue to torment her, eventually leading her to isolate herself in her grandfather's abandoned house. However, her suffering only deepens. At one point, she is horrified to discover that she has become pregnant without any logical explanation. She becomes convinced that the pregnancy is unnatural and is instead the result of the demon now living inside her. Driven by fear and desperation, Abigail attempts to terminate the pregnancy on her own. A few days later, after being gone without any contact for so long, she finally reaches out to her younger sister Alice to say goodbye. During the call, Abigail apologizes, explaining that she will never return home, while warning that something dangerous inside her could put Alice at risk. For Alice's safety, she urges her to forget about her entirely. The following day, Abigail is confronted once again by the demon, which appears in the form of her father. Speaking with anger, the entity expresses its frustration, claiming that Abigail has ruined its plan by ending the pregnancy, declaring that she must pay for her actions by sacrificing her own sister. Abigail, of course, refuses and desperately begs for another solution. In response, the demon presents an equally horrifying alternative. It orders Abigail to kidnap multiple children and offer them as sacrifices until it finds one it deems suitable. If she fails, Alice will become the next target. In her desperation, Abigail even tries to negotiate by offering animals instead, but the demon Vulpezoo rejects the idea and continues to force her to comply with its demands. The next day, the story shifts to a young boy named Bobby, who is happily playing with bubbles in a park, completely unaware of the danger approaching him. As he plays, he suddenly hears a strange whisper coming from a small cave nearby, as if something is calling out to him and drawing him closer. Without suspicion, Bobby slowly follows the voice, while his older sister remains distracted on her phone, oblivious to the danger. With no one there to stop him, Bobby ultimately becomes the first victim in this series of terrifying events. After returning home, Abigail is horrified to realize that she has unknowingly abducted and killed an innocent child. A wave of fear and guilt immediately overwhelms her. But the nightmare doesn't end there. The demon appears once again, making it clear that a single victim is not enough, forcing Abigail to continue kidnapping more children until it finds one it deems worthy as an offering. This terrifying demand proves that Abigail is completely under the control of a sinister force, leaving her with no escape. Without fully realizing it, she has already taken 3 victims in an attempt to satisfy the demon's orders. The story then shifts back to the present, where Mikey is left in shock after witnessing the police officer who came to rescue him die in a brutal and horrifying way. At that moment, Abigail briefly regains her consciousness and realizes that she can no longer endure being controlled by the demon. In her desperation, she urges Mikey to run and save himself, while she decides to end her suffering by taking her own life. Meanwhile, a tragic fate also befalls John, who sinks into deep regret and depression after losing his daughter. His condition worsens when he learns that a police officer has been found dead at his parents' house, followed by the discovery of Abigail's body, with strong suspicion linking her to a series of kidnappings. The overwhelming pressure of these events destroys what little hope John has left, ultimately leading him to take his own life as well. Time then jumps forward nearly 20 years when the case resurfaces through a talk show hosted by a presenter named Karen. On the show, Alice, now an adult, is invited to speak about the horrifying events involving her sister. She finally decides to share her story publicly, recounting the trauma she has carried for years. On the other hand, it is revealed that Mikey survived and has grown into adulthood, though in a deeply disturbed state. He lives alone in an abandoned house, still haunted by the trauma he endured, unable to move on from the past. On Halloween night, Alice, driven by lingering curiosity, attempts to uncover the truth by watching old recordings related to the investigation involving Mikey. From these recordings, it becomes clear that Mikey suffers from severe psychological trauma after spending months with Abigail. Even his mother, Naomi, notices a drastic change in him, realizing that he is no longer the same child she once knew. Eventually, Mikey disappears again after previously displaying strange behavior, including drawing disturbing figures. Another recording, this time belonging to Steve, reveals that all of the horror began when John unknowingly released the demon from the cursed artifact, which ultimately led to Abigail becoming possessed. Steve also warns that the danger has not ended, continuing to search for new victims. Not long after, Alice is startled by a mysterious phone call. Assuming it is nothing more than a Halloween prank, she ignores it and goes to bed. However, in the middle of the night, she suddenly wakes from a nightmare, her unease growing stronger when she hears movement around her house. When she goes to check, Alice notices a figure covered in cloth standing outside, as if asking for candy. At first, everything seems normal, but she soon realizes that something is terribly wrong. The shocking truth is revealed when the figure turns out to be Mikey, who now claims that he has been chosen as the demon's new servant, replacing Abigail. Under overwhelming pressure, Mikey forces Alice to take his place so he can finally escape the torment he has suffered for so long. Hearing this, Alice panics and tries to drive him away with threats. However, the situation quickly turns far more horrifying when the demon reveals its true form right before her eyes. Outside the house, Mikey recalls the moment he was chosen as the replacement. At the same time, Alice's boyfriend, Alex, arrives to meet her. Completely unaware of the danger, Alex becomes the next victim when Mikey, now fully possessed, suddenly appears behind him and violently attacks him. From that point on, the entity controlling Mikey grows even more unstable, targeting anyone connected to Alice. The story then shifts to Karen, who arrives at her workplace and immediately senses something is wrong when she finds the studio completely deserted. Her fear is confirmed when she discovers one of the employees, Diana, covered in blood, suggesting that Mikey has already attacked the building. In a panic, Karen and Diana split up to hide, but the situation becomes even more dangerous as Mikey slowly tracks Karen down. Desperate to survive, Karen makes a ruthless decision. She diverts Mikey's attention toward Diana, which ultimately leads to Diana's tragic death. Karen then attempts to escape, but fails when she realizes the studio's rolling door is locked. When Mikey finally confronts her, she uses an electric shock device to temporarily incapacitate him and quickly tries to call for help. But before she can finish, Mikey regains consciousness and nearly kills her. Just in time, Alice arrives and manages to stop him. In the middle of the chaos, she makes a critical decision. She agrees to take Mikey's place as the demon's servant, hoping this sacrifice will finally bring an end to everything. For a brief moment, this seems to calm Mikey. However, it soon becomes clear that the demon still harbors resentment toward Abigail's family and continues to target Alice. At that crucial moment, Karen manages to intervene once again, stopping Mikey and saving Alice by killing him. For a short time, it feels as though everything is finally over, as the long chain of terror that claims so many victims appears to have come to an end. But when looking back at everything that has happened from the very beginning, one truth becomes undeniable. No one has ever truly been able to stop it. Jafar tried to bury the artifact. Abigail fought against it. Even her death failed to bring an end to the horror. The demon never truly disappears. It only waits, moves on, and searches for a new host. And now, without fully realizing it, Alice's decision to replace Mikey has opened the door for the next cycle of terror, a never-ending chain that continues as if it has no conclusion. Because in the end, this was never about how to stop it, but about who will become the next victim. And with that, the story comes to an end.